but perfect. Thanks, Jimmy. Just for the folks who are here, I think it would be great if we could get started. I want to introduce myself. My name is Kelsey Payne. I'm the water quality manager for the Snoqualmie tribe, and as of 2 weeks, I am also your new TWIG lead, taking over for Matt Bayerwald, and kind of helping to facilitate these trainings and workshops that TWIG puts on. I want to thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate you starting with us first thing at 9 o'clock. I know for some of us that's our starting time, so appreciate you being here. Before we get started, I was hoping we could take a group photo. I know it's a little awkward being on Zoom, but it's really nice to, just have a sense of who is here with us and what's going on. So if you feel comfortable this morning, I'd appreciate if you throw on your video, and we're going to take just a super quick screenshot of our group today. Thank you so much. Okay. All right, Jimmy, help me out here. You remember how to take a screenshot?
Yes, I can definitely do it too if you want. I use like the little.
Perfect. I think folks are still throwing on their screen, so we'll give everybody just another minute, but.
Cool.
Thanks, y'all.
3, 2, 1, smile countdown.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. All right. 3, 2, 1. Great.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all for humoring me this morning. Feel free to turn on and off your video as you see fit. I know we're all feeling that Zoom fatigue, so no need to have your video on during the full training this morning. Jimmy, would you mind throwing up our agenda for today so that we can walk through quickly and get everybody comfortable with our schedule? Perfect. Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, so our training today is going to be an introduction to the new Tribal Wetland Program Plan Guide. We're going to start, with our introductions now. Jimmy is going to go over a little bit of housekeeping in just a minute. And then Linda's going to give us an introduction to the new guide. We're going to hear from Matt a little bit about the tribal perspective and what the roundtable process has been. And then we're going to hear from Lucy Moore and Doug Thompson more about the guide and kind of its particulars and give you a nice introduction to that. Or we'll be taking questions and we'll grab a quick break. A little later on in the morning, we're going to hear from Heather Bartlett, Roger Cohen, and Amanda Summers to talk a little bit more about their particular wetland programs and how they're utilizing their funding to support their tribes. At the end, we're going to stop recording and we're going to take a few minutes just to talk amongst ourselves a little bit about our new Wetland Program Development Grant and what to expect from that, kind of what's going on. And I'm really hoping to get your thoughts and opinions on how we should spend our money, what kind of trainings and workshops that you're interested in. We're going to try to wrap up around 11:30, but we've got some extra time scheduled 11:30 to noon, just in case conversations run a little long, but hoping to get you out on time so that we can all get back to lunch and get back to it. So I briefly, I know we've asked everybody to put their name and affiliation in the chat, but I like to hear people's voices. Feels a little more personal. So if we could run around really quickly, maybe I can call your name quickly and you can kind of give a brief introduction about who you are and who you're here representing today. So I'll start. My name is Kelsey Payne, and I'm the water quality manager for the Snoqualmie tribe. Jimmy, would you like to go next as our facilitator?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Kelsey. Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy Krall. I'm a consultant with Environmental Science Associates, and I will be helping facilitate today and trying my best at any tech issues that come up. So great to see everybody.
Perfect. Lucy and Doug, would you like to go next? Lucy, I think you're on mute.
Well, somebody had to be the first to do it, and I'm proud to be that person.
There you go.
Everybody else can feel free to just talk away on mute. So my name's Lucy Moore. I'm really happy to be here. I've been a fan of the TWIG for many years. I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm a facilitator and mediator and have been working with Doug Thompson on this tribal wetlands guide project for over a year now. So it's very exciting for us to do a little pre-rollout with you today. Thanks.
You know, if I heard "I love you" as often as I hear "you are on mute," life would be good. So I'm Doug Thompson. I'm a mediator and facilitator with the Consensus Building Institute, and likewise a fan of the TWIG, as once learned about that a couple of years ago and been following all the great work that this group has been doing. And then more recently had the good fortune to be working with Lucy and Linda and Matt, among others, to help develop this tribal wetland guide. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. We'll just keep working top to bottom on my screen. So next up is Linda.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Linda Storm. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency out of the Seattle office, which covers Region 10, encompassing the 271 federally recognized tribes in Idaho, Oregon, Alaska, and Washington State. And I'm delighted to be here. And I'm the EPA Wetlands and Ocean Section lead for the grant and provide the technical support and like the technical advisor liaison with EPA for the TWIG. Happy to be here today.
Great, thank you, Linda. Next up is Matt.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Bearwald with Snoqualmie Tribe. Was the past TWIG lead. I'm the environmental policy analyst at Snoqualmie Tribe now, and happy to see some familiar faces, some we haven't seen in a while. Good to see you back here, Brad, and others, and some new ones too. Really happy to be here this morning.
All right, let's go to Brad next. I like your background, Brad.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Brad Parrish. I'm here with the Klamath Tribes. I'm the water rights specialist, Southern Oregon.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Next up, Ashley.
Galaga Ice, Ashley Russell Sinsanu, Milika'au. Good day. My name is Ashley Russell. I'm a Millet Coos tribal person, and I am the water protection specialist and newly appointed cultural stewardship assistant for the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Slurumquat, and Sayusla Indians. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you, Ashley. Thank you. Next up is Amanda.
Hey, I'm Amanda Summers. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Stillwamish tribe.
All right, I've got someone with the name of A. Warner.
Hi, sorry, this is Allison Warner. I'm with the Tulalip tribe at Quilceda Village, Wetland Program Coordinator here.
Allison, thank you so much. And next up is Rue.
Hi, I'm Rue Hewitt Hoover. I work for the Next First Tribe. I'm the wetland specialist and wetland program planner for the tribe.
Perfect, thanks, Rue. Stacy.
Hi, I'm Stacy. I'm the wetland specialist for Colville Confederated Tribes Environmental Trust.
Hi, Stacy. Thanks for joining us. And you're fairly new to the tribe, right?
Yes. So it's been about 4 weeks now that I've been with the tribe. So it's
wonderful.
Been great. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. All right. Next up is Tom.
Hi there, everybody. My video is so awful here. I'm kind of winging it. So The background is the Washington State waterfall. Did everybody know that, over at Palouse Falls? Pretty great place. Anyway, I'm the GIS program manager at the Snoqualmie tribe across Puget Sound from Seattle. So ever since the beginning here, I've been kind of a stand-in trying to get our wetland folks to attend more. I think these meetings are important. And so again, I'm kind of standing in. There's always something of GIS interest though. So thanks for holding these. Thanks, Kelsey, for taking the torch from Matt. I'm sure he appreciates that.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Glad you're here today. Next up is Walks Through Mud. I think that must be Greg.
Yeah, that's me, Greg Idy. I'm the Invasive Species Program Coordinator for the Quinault Indian Nation, but I also supervise Janice Martin, our wetland scientist, and I'm the former wetland scientist for Quinault. Anyway, I try to be as involved as possible. I'm on the steering committee for TWIG. I just try to support Janice with all the wetland related stuff on the reservation and anything that happens in our usual and custom area.
Thanks so much, Greg. All right, next up is Bridger.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Bridger Cohen. I am with the Yakama Nation's Wildlife Program and the Wetlands Restoration Biologist there. So kind of in charge of the wetland side of things within the Wildlife Program. And I think this is my second TWIG interaction, so happy to be here.
That's great. I'm glad to see that we've got some new people joining us, as well as our, old favorites. Thanks for sharing. Let's go to Mark.
Mark Healy. I work for the Coquel Indian tribe, and I'm their water and environmental specialist.
Thanks, Mark. Next up is Janice.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Janice Martin, wetland specialist from the Quinault Indian Nation. It's good to be here. And I look forward to today's workshop.
Thanks so much for being here, Janice. Oh, love your background, by the way. The swamp lantern, so beautiful. Can't wait till spring again. All right, next up is Chris.
Hi, this is Chris Correa. I work with EPA Region 10 out of the Portland office, and I'm a tribal coordinator. I work with tribes in Oregon and in Southwest and Western Washington State. Happy to be here today.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to have you. All right, I think next up on the list is Aurora. Or are you there? All right, we'll come back to Aurora. She may be having some technical trouble.
Hey,
there you
sorry.
are. Hey, no worries.
Hi, I'm in Sitka. I'm the fishery biologist, and we had a wetlands program for monitoring a couple of years ago. So I'm excited to learn what it might look like and hopefully get some wetlands monitoring back up at the Sitka tribe.
Oh, that's exciting to hear. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah.
T. all good. That must be Tiffany.
So good morning. I'm Tiffany Allgood, and I work for the Coeur d'Alene tribe. We're located in northern Idaho, very close to Coeur d'Alene and Spokane. Sitting in pretty much for our wetlands coordinator, Matt Fisher, who I think probably some of you at least know is retiring. So we've been trying to hire a new wetlands coordinator and haven't successfully done that yet. But I want to make sure that we're keeping our presence at TWIG going and that we're continuing to learn from everybody. So good morning. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Next up is Heather.
Hihon Nuwaste. Good morning. My name is Heather Bartlett, and I am the Cow Creek Tribal Environmental Specialist, and I will be presenting in about an hour. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I cannot wait to hear more about your mitigation banking project. It's going to be good stuff. Next up is Linda. I'm sorry, Linda Nemeth.
What's that, Linda Nemeth?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, Nemeth, thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda Nemeth. I'm a planner with the Nez Perce tribe. I work with Rue on some of her projects. I'm not actually a wetlands person, but I just wanted to, she's very involved with TWIG and in favor of a lot of things they're doing. So I just wanted to sit down and hear some of this today.
I'm excited to have you with us. Hopefully you learn something worthwhile while you're here. And then last but not least, we've got our caller on the phone. Would you mind again stating your name and where you're from?
Travis Butterfield, out here at Macaw Fisheries Management. I do forest practices for the Macaw tribe.
Thank you so much, Travis. Appreciate you joining us here, even if it's only on the phone. Hope you're going to be able to hear everything just fine. So great. Well, without further ado, I want to turn it over to Jimmy, who's going to be our online facilitator today, just to go over a few quick housekeeping things, and then we'll get this show on the road.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, I'll keep it pretty short, but just wanted to remind folks that if you're not speaking or presenting, to just please keep your audio on mute. We are recording the meeting today, so that will be available later. And if you've got any questions that come up during presentations, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that, and then when we have time for some Q&A, I can read those aloud and make sure that we get some answers to your questions. And if you have any other tech issues, please feel free to just send me a message using the Zoom chat. So, thanks.
Thanks, Jimmy. All right, next I'm going to turn it over to Linda Storm, who is going to give us an overview of kind of how this guide got started, and yeah, give us a little intro to what we're going to be talking about today. Thanks, Linda.
Hello. Thank you. I am just going to read, or not read, but speak to some of the history of how the Region 10, we used to call it the Region 10 TWIG. Now we're referring to y'all as the Pacific Northwest Tribal Wetland Working Group. Encouraged EPA to develop a tribally specific wetland program guide. So just a little bit of background. The TWIG was initiated back in, as you all may or may not know, 2009. After a EPA sponsored training, and we all got together in Idaho, and folks were really excited about continuing the conversation. And so from that, the TWIG was birthed. And I think it was in 2010 that there was like a $10,000 grant that was provided. And then Scott O'Daniel with the Umatilla tribe took the lead as the TWIG lead. And from there, starting in 2011, different tribes hosted each year an annual get together. And the TWIG started forming its organizational structure and becoming a peer-to-peer network for tribes within the EPA's Region 10, which we're now calling the Pacific Northwest, but it does include Alaska. So it's been going strong ever since. And there have been a number of different tribes, mostly the lower 3 states located in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And I think it was around 2015, and Matt can probably correct me if I'm wrong, that the Colville tribe hosted a gathering. And from that, there were a couple of really critical outcomes in terms of messages to EPA. One of them was that folks are interested in developing wetland programs, but the tools that had been developed by EPA in concert with the Association for State Wetland Managers in 2013 was a little bit state-centric. And the tribes really wanted something that would be more tribally centered and really respect and honor tribal cultural differences, the importance of traditional ecological knowledge, the importance of land connection and tenure, as well as the complexities of tribal situations. So from that was birthed our EPA Region 10 manager and others' requests to EPA headquarters that there be funding set aside for the development of a tribal handbook or supplement to the existing handbook. And we were able to successfully get funding, and it finally got off sort of the ground in terms of our working with our EPA headquarters. Kathleen Kuchenruder, and some of you may know, is the lead or was the lead in our EPA region or EPA headquarters office out of Washington, DC. And she and I worked very closely together to develop a scope of work for what this would be that would meet the needs that the TWIG had articulated back in 2015. And we had the scope of work reviewed by Matt and Scott O'Daniel for their input, and they provided us excellent input on the importance of the process for developing the guide being inclusive of tribal voices, to be representative of tribes from different capacities and from different ecological settings and different parts of the country, so that it would represent the diversity and complexity of Indian country across the nation. And so from that, there was a contract that was let in 2018, I believe. We didn't really start the work until 2019. The contract was transferred, and that was a little challenging. So there were some fits and starts, but ultimately Lucy Moore and Associates and Doug Thompson's organization were hired as subcontractors, and the project got off the ground, including reaching out to multiple tribes across the country, asking if they'd like to serve on the roundtable. And from that, I think we ended up with 15 different tribal representatives, some of whom were from Region 10's TWIG, Matt Bearwald, Rue Hewitt-Hoover, and I believe Tom Elliott from the Yakima. We've been working since that time. Lucy and Doug and others have hosted with the roundtable, which included not only the tribal representatives, but several EPA regional representatives, and then a representative from the Association for State Wetland Managers, Marla Stelk, apologies. And we have come to a place of having a really solid draft now of the guide, with lots of input and collaboration and labor from all of the folks that participated. The other thing that so I'm really excited, we're coming to the finish line. I just did my deep editorial eye review and provided comments. I know Matt and Verna Potts and multiple other tribal representatives provided comments as well. And it's now with Lucy and Doug to finalize that, and they can speak more to that. The other thing I want to say, just in terms of the history of how this came to be, is the Region 10 tribal leadership was instrumental in making this happen. If it weren't for the Pacific Northwest TWIG and you're pushing me and pushing our headquarters, frankly, this would not have come about. So the TWIG here in the Pacific Northwest has strength in having a voice and a relationship with us to make things happen in terms of getting funding. The other critical thing that happened around that time, in addition to articulating the need to be more tribally sensitive and to try have a core element framework, we call it, for developing wetland program plans for tribes, was the need for additional funding for tribes. And so around that same time frame, my manager advocated strongly that there be additional funding for tribes for Region 10, because we have so many tribes, but also across the nation. And out of that same time frame, the National Tribal Set-Aside Wetland Program Development Grant opportunity came about. What we did was we carved off 10% of the competitive funds that are available through competition between states and tribes, and we made them tribal only. So concurrent with that voice, that strength of your voice, advocating for a tribally relevant wetland program guide, core element framework approach to including tribal cultural values, et cetera. We also got the National Tribal Set-Aside funds to be an opportunity for funding tribal capacity building and tribal wetland programs. So that's basically about it. I hope to see that finalization of this become available, and then EPA will do what we can to help you all and the other tribes across the country get the word out and continue to build capacity in a peer-to-peer and collaborative way for wetland program protection. So thanks, everybody. And kudos to Matt and others who really are the voices persevering.
Thank you so much, Linda. I really appreciate that. I feel like it just gives us a little bit of context for our conversation today. And is a great place to get started. So thank you so much. Next up, we're going to hear from Matt Bearwall, who's going to give us a little bit of an insider look at the roundtable process. Take it away, Matt.
Sure. Thanks, Kelsey, and thanks, Linda, for that was an excellent summary. Yeah, so the handbook guide was created with close participation and input from a diversity of tribal representatives from tribal organizations around the country. The recruitment of those folks was headed up by our project leads and EPA. I think that's right, Lucy? Yep. And so I think that was done through, I don't actually know exactly how that was done. I imagine it was done through EPA regional channels. And, you know, just looking for volunteers. And, you know, to be honest, I was somewhat skeptical that we would get sufficient volunteer participation to cover what felt like, you know, representative and inclusive group that would be sufficient of the diversity of tribes across the nation. And I was pleasantly surprised with not just the number, but, you know, the sort of caliber and commitment of the participants and the volunteers that were able to help out. And it was really a group effort. Of course, you know, these things need a primary author. That was our contractors. That was by design, because how do things get done? You know, we have to find the resources to get things done. And show me a tribe that has extra capacity, right? That, you know, can just pick up projects with a sort of an unfunded mandate or something like that. Like tribes are typically quite full, and tribal staff, you know, time is quite full if they're lucky enough to get funding to keep their staff anyway. So that was by design, and that's how it played out. So I don't off the top of my head recall how many participants were on the roundtable. You know, in general, the groups, I'd say, you know, there were about 15 to 20 people at the meetings in general on average. And probably a core of a dozen or so that spoke the most and, you know, provided the most input. And there was really a lot of, you know, there were different opinions. It wasn't always everyone on the same page. So I was glad to see that, actually. That I think that means we're doing a good job and that people are speaking up, and we'll probably arrive at something close to a correct answer, if there is one, even though that's not the right phrasing. But yeah, I was really happy with the way it all came together. There's definitely a conscious effort made to build a community within the Roundtable, which is another, you know, another high bar to get over with the virtual platform. But again, you know, I was really pleased with how it came together. I did feel like I got to know, to some extent, some of my fellow Roundtable participants, and yeah, without being able to get together in person, I think we did as good of a job as one might expect. So yeah, overall, I think it was well done and professionally done, and yeah, kudos.
Kudos indeed. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you giving us a little bit of background on what this process has been like, you know, and a little bit of an introduction to what it is the tribes have been putting into this. Next up, I want to let Lucy and Doug take the floor, and they're going to give us an introduction to the guide and let you know what it is that you can expect, hopefully later this year when it's published. So I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey, so much. I really appreciate hearing both from Linda and Matt. It gives me that really important sense of how this came to be, of the work that went into those early days of kind of drumming up support and needed funds to create this guide. And Linda, I know you were really key in that. And Matt, you were so important on the Roundtable before and after the process. So many thanks to you both. So Jimmy, if you could, we do have a few slides to kind of help give you a feel for the product here. And I just want to start by saying, I also want to say that it was really wonderful, Kelsey, to hear everybody introduce themselves. I think that's a great way to start. And I grew up in Seattle, so it was just really heartwarming for me to hear the names of the tribes again and just picture where you all are. So I feel in a way I've come home. So thank you so much for that. So here is the title of the document, which is kind of lengthy, but important: Protecting Waters and Wetlands in Indian Country. So it's more than just wetlands, and a guide for developing tribal wetland management programs. It was called a handbook for a long time, and then we realized that there is an existing tribal wetlands handbook, as Linda mentioned, from the Association of Tribal Wetland Managers, and that it was probably better for us to call ours a guide rather than a handbook. So that is why it is a guide. Next slide. Linda talked about how it came to be and what the impetus was for making this, and that was a great summary. I think another factor is why this guide now. There is such a need for healthy, sustainable wetlands for the sake of all of us, including the planet. I mean, they are key in fighting and counteracting the impacts of climate change. So this is really a time to focus on wetlands and other tribal aquatic resources. And those resources are fragile and they're suffering. They're some of the first victims of climate change. So it really felt urgent for us to get this guide out for people to use. Secondly, many wetlands and important aquatic resources are on tribal land, as we all know. And so it's really important to give tribes the help they need to keep those healthy for all of us. Tribes requested a guide, as Linda explained, specific to their needs and situations. The handbook from Association of State Wetland Managers is really excellent, but it lacked that tribal focus that tribes needed. And importantly, EPA responded. How many times do tribes request things, make a case for what they need, and the importance of this priority, and it falls on deaf ears. In this case, hallelujah, EPA responded. And here, just a short few years later, which is not bad, we're on the verge of actually having that product. Finally, wetlands hold a special place, as you all know, in tribal traditions and culture. And the health of the wetlands is integrally connected to the health and the well-being of the community. The health and the well-being of the community helps also in reverse, helps preserve the wetlands and give them the attention they need. Next slide. So here is a look at the cover of the ASWM handbook that I've mentioned, Wetland Program Plans Handbook. Tribes told us this is a very important and useful document. There's no, we had no intention of, and the instructions were not to replace this, but rather to offer a complementary document that would go along with and help tribes better protect and manage wetlands. Next slide. So as Matt described, and thanks Matt for that, this is the Roundtable as it finally was constituted. And you'll see it's got great representation from the TWIG. And all those TWIG members were really big contributors to the process. We had some diversity across the country, especially across the northern tier and the west into the southwest. We lacked representation from the East Coast and the Southeast. We tried to, I think EPA tried to recruit from those areas, but wetlands are really mostly a Western issue, it seems. So we also had 4 representatives from EPA from region 9, 10, 5, and 8. So that's across the northern band. And Marla Stelk, who's the executive director of the Association of State Wetland Managers, also served on the roundtable, which was very useful. Next slide. So this shows the geographical spread of the tribal members. They are in green, and the non-tribal members, in other words, EPA and Marla Stelk from ASWM, are in blue. So it was, we had a good variety for sure of tribes with wetlands. We tried to make sure that we had diversity of geography, topography, climate, ecosystems, different sizes of tribes, different progress in developing their wetland programs. Some were very early on, some were quite established. We felt that mix was really important for us to get the advice and the guidance that we needed in writing that draft of the handbook. Oh, I said it, of the guide. Old habits die hard. Next slide, please. So the roundtable began meeting in January, this last January. We were held up as everything was by COVID in 2019 and got off to a slow start and contracting issues, as Linda mentioned. But since January 2021, that group you just saw has met 7 times altogether. In the beginning, we worked to develop some relationships among the members, get to know each other where everybody stood, not just geographically, but in terms of protecting wetlands, what their wetlands, what the characteristics were, et cetera. And then we began drafting the document and took those drafts, first kind of looking at the organization of the document, and then more specifically wording in the different sections. So although it's impossible to write by committee, this actually was close to that, and I'm happy to say that because of the real engagement of the members. So where are we right now? We had our final roundtable meeting on the 1st of October. We met at that time the tribal graphic designer, and we had, Doug and I and the roundtable had really felt that the graphics for the guide were really an important part of it, that it needed to look and be designed in a way that was accessible. And we hoped that EPA could subcontract with a tribal firm. And I'm happy to say that they sent out invitations, I think, to 30 different tribal graphic designing firms around the country, and selected MABU, all in caps, MABU, from North Dakota, and we met them at our last meeting. It was really a great welcoming moment for them to join this effort, and I think they're going to do a great job. So right now we have finished the comment period for the roundtable members. It's kind of, they've been contributing all along, but of course this was kind of their last chance before it goes now to EPA for their comment and review process, and they're going to send it out to more, I think, within the EPA community. So right now, Doug and I are looking at the comments that have come in from the roundtable and are going to revise the document accordingly. In a couple of weeks, it will probably go to EPA. They will then send out that version for wider comment and review. And I'm not sure when you will see it as a finished product, but certainly by the end of the year, and hopefully maybe the end of November. Next slide. So the direction that the roundtable gave us was as follows, and these were messages throughout our meetings, that it be tribal centric and that it really show how EPA programs and requirements are not exclusive of important tribal concepts like TEK, cultural preservation, et cetera, that the two can work together. There was a feeling on the part of some that EPA was blind to the tribal needs, to the whole tribal way of viewing wetlands and how they fit into culture and community. So this guide should definitely show how the two can work together and support each other. It needed to be easy to navigate, written in a clear language, graphics rich with photos, inset boxes, illustrations, etc., whatever to make it inviting. And many tribal examples needed to be included, including case studies. And we have, I think, I'm not sure of the number at this point, but I think it's nearly 15 case studies that are in the appendix. And also links to references, documents, and additional information. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Doug, and he is going to go through what's actually inside the guide. Doug, please.
Thank you, Lucy, and hello again, everyone. You know, having heard Linda and Matt and Lucy give you all this information, I feel like, I think it was Mo Udall who once said that everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. So I guess that's my cue. And so what I'd like to do is we'll just give you a little peek under the hood, I guess you might say, about what's in the guide itself. And to kind of follow on to what Lucy was saying, there were, as we developed this, there were several you might call dimensions of tension involved, and not tension in the sense of disagreement or argument, but simply having to make some strategic choices about how to put this thing together. And I would echo what the others have said, that we received so much excellent and thoughtful guidance from the Roundtable. And if there's any success with this, the credit really belongs there. So some of the things that we thought about is we wanted this to be sufficiently detailed, but not encyclopedic, right? You know, we didn't want it to be too much to handle. And we also wanted to be mindful of the different tribal circumstances that are out there. You know, when you say it's a guide for tribes, it might seem like that's a fairly homogeneous audience, but that clearly isn't the case. And the more I worked on this, the clearer certainly that became to me. And there's such a range out there. You know, some tribes do not have any real wetland program in place, or it's just kind of a gleam in the eye. And then there are other tribes that have had mature, sophisticated wetland protection programs of long standing. And then a whole lot in between, you know, those two ends of things. So the audience is actually quite varied. And to some extent, there's a non-tribal element to the audience as well. We wanted this document to be significantly informed by, but not constrained by, the core element framework that EPA has put together, and which I think most, if not all of you, are quite familiar with. And that clearly is an important component and a centerpiece of this, but we're aware that's not the only way to approach a wetland protection program, and we wanted to be more inclusive than that. Basically trying to integrate the federal, state, tribal constructs about resource protection, which, while there's a lot of overlap, you know, they're not identical. And then finally, we really wanted this to be, to the extent we could make it so, you know, practical, accessible, practical, kind of how-to. Because if you read a lot of sort of theoretical constructs without any guidance about how to actually make it happen, you know, that can be a difficult transition sometimes. In terms of the organization, we initially thought about, you know, maybe this should just be an appendix to the ASWM handbook that exists, because that is a very good document. But the clear sense of the Roundtable was that, no, this should be a standalone document. You know, part of that being, you know, candidly, the optics of it. We didn't want this to look like the tribal tail on the state dog, you know, that the tribes really have a set of unique circumstances that should be addressed independently. We also considered, the Roundtable spent quite a bit of time considering, should we approach this in sort of a topical organization, which, as you can see on the slide here, we ended up doing, or should we present it as a series of case studies? And in the end, what we did was kind of a hybrid approach. We sprinkled in case studies and kind of call out boxes and examples throughout the text of the document. But there is an appendix, as you can see here, Appendix B, which has the more detailed case study summaries. So there are some case studies in that appendix that do not appear at all in the text, and then ones that do appear in the text are described in greater detail in that one. And the case studies and the examples were drawn from things that were submitted by the Roundtable members and by also going through the wetland program plans, approved wetland program plans that EPA has up on its website. So there are four, as you can see on this is a slide of the table of contents as it currently stands. There may be some revisions still that take place, but it really has four main components, five, I guess, if we think of the appendices. And, you know, we set the stage here with the introduction, why the guide, the development process, how it might be used. You don't necessarily have to go through this, you know, section by section. You can jump around, and it hopefully is still quite useful that way. And then some fundamentals, some basics about the existing Association of State Wetland Managers Handbook, the core element framework, wetland program plans. And then something we have in each of these main sections is a Q&A piece, which is where we try to raise some of the more difficult questions that tribes confront. And it's easier to raise those questions than to answer them with certainty, but we thought it was important to confront some of those difficult issues forthrightly. And so we tried to do that. And we have a section here about considerations when working in the tribal context. And that may be useful for the tribal audience, but it could be especially useful for the non-tribal audience as well. And then we get into the heart of the document, section 3, which is the ingredients for tribal programs. And I won't read them all here. You can see them on the slide. But right up front, we have incorporating cultural values and traditional ecological knowledge as an important component. And then we get into the various aspects of the core element framework. And again, the Q&A section. And then the fourth main component here is getting help, that financial help, maybe forming partnerships, and partnerships that can be with other tribes, with states, with federal agencies, and so forth. And again, some questions and answers on that. And then the appendices, we list the tribal member, the roundtable members, both tribal and EPA, the case study summaries, which I mentioned. We're in the process of developing a matrix of sort of funding sources, so kind of a quick, handy reference for funding, which is a perpetual issue, as you all know. And then a set of references or additional resources where people can go to. So if we go to the next slide, if you would. So I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of slides here. Don't expect you to read all this fine print. This is just to give you a little bit of a sense of what is actually in the guide itself. So here's a somewhat randomly chosen section of questions and answers. And this is related to the core element framework and some questions and then some answers. So we have sections like this sprinkled throughout the document. Next slide, if you would, thank you. We also have, as I mentioned in the text, these kind of call out boxes where we will highlight a particular example or a particular case study of some kind. And you can see one here, which is the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes regulatory program work. And so we describe that a little bit here. And then in the appendix, there'll be a more complete description of that case study. And can't quite see the whole thing here, but again, not asking you to read this, just to give you a sense of what it actually looks like. And then next slide, if you would. And then here's an example of the first page of a case study, and it's yours, your case, the TWIG here. And credit to Matt Bearwald for giving us this information. And the way we're organizing these, you know, hoping to have some photographs or some graphics associated with a lot of these case studies. There's a little dashboard, you can kind of see that in green, where you can get some critical information right up front. And then the more detailed description of the case study will follow after that. Next slide. So I think we kind of touched on this, so I won't belabor it now. But what we are hoping, our aspiration here, for this guide and why it would be different and useful is that it should contain some good updated information. The ASWM handbook was done in 2013, so that was a number of years ago, and a lot has transpired since then. Really want to be explicit in incorporating the cultural elements, traditional ecological knowledge, things of that sort into the document. As I mentioned, the focus on practical kind of real world issues, and try to be faithful to the direction we clearly heard from the roundtable, that this really is a representation of the tribal experience and useful for the tribes, tribally focused. Next slide, if you would, last one. So what's coming up? This just gives you kind of a conceptual sequence. As Lucy mentioned, the graphics firm is on board, and so working with them, that's MABU, M-A-B-U. They're in North Dakota, I believe. We have just completed the kind of final roundtable comment period. They've had the opportunity, of course, to be weighing in on the document all the way through, but we've just closed that out. So we're kind of at the cusp here between number 2 and number 3. So Lucy and I and others will be picking up the document and starting to make revisions, really this week, we hope. So we'll make the revisions that will improve the document, and then we'll get to the phase of rolling it out. You'll still have to go through some approval steps and that kind of thing, but we'll hopefully be able to roll this out, by the end of the year, as we mentioned. So I think that's kind of where we are. It seems propitious to have this discussion because yesterday, some of you may know, was the anniversary of the signing of the Clean Water Act 49 years ago. It was October 18th, 1972. It passed both houses and was vetoed by President Nixon, but the veto was overridden the next day. And the Clean Water Act in its initial form came to be. So some of us wouldn't be here without that. So thank you very much. Kelsey, should I turn it back to you, or how do you want to proceed from here?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Lucy, so much. You guys have done such great work on this. I'm very much looking forward to reading this document and learning even more about what it is that y'all have put together. I want to open this time up for a few questions for Lucy, Doug, or Linda and Matt. Any questions about the guide that you might have, go ahead and either raise your hand or throw them in the chat, and we can, open up a few questions.
A comment, just something I wanted to add from something that we heard repeatedly on our last roundtable meeting, was that everyone, or many of us, wished that this guide existed when we were starting wetland programs or starting in our positions, or just starting to familiarize ourselves with wetland programs and wetland program development grants. And so, I think it's going to be really helpful, especially for new folks to get acquainted, but even just refreshers for folks that have been around tribal wetlands for a while. And, even for those of us that have worked in the TWIG here, there's a lot more out there across the country too. There's a lot going on with tribal wetland programs in other parts of the country. And so there's a little bit of a taste of that. And so I think there's a lot to offer in it.
Great, thanks, Matt. While we're waiting for some more questions to roll in, and again, feel free to either raise your hand or throw those in the chat. We've got our first question. Ashley says, thank you so much for putting this together. Oh, okay. So she's got a comment here. We're currently hiring our first wetland protection specialist. It's coming at a great time. Perfect. Oh, I love to hear that. Programs expanding and getting to take advantage of, these new documents as they become available. I've got a question for you. I am wondering how hefty of a document this is, and how much time we're going to need to set aside for getting up to speed on it. Do you have a sense of kind of how big this is going to be?
Well, let's see, Lucy, I'm trying to remember. I think the text right now is running in the, 45 page range, and then we have the appendices. Is that right? I can do a quick check here, but it's in that range. The total size is probably going to be in the 50 to 60 pages. I think something in that range. It'll be electronic. I don't think the plan is to print out a bunch of hard copies, which will also make it easier to update and amend in the future as needed.
Actually,
I would just add that there's a lot of break in the pages. It isn't that tribes really emphasized they did not want page after page of text. So, there are those call out boxes that Doug showed in different, and there will be graphics, photos sprinkled throughout. So, I don't think it'll be a hard read.
No, it's not a novel either. It's not required to read it totally sequentially. Right. You can use the table of contents to jump around. You could just sort of flip around as well. If you're just looking for ideas, you could flip to the case studies and just see, what are some examples of other tribal wetland programs. So I don't think it'll be too intimidating. 40 or 50 pages of text sounds intimidating, but it's not 40 or 50 pages of text. It's broken up. There's pictures, graphics, or will be pictures and graphics, and
right.
and there's call out boxes as well.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate having something compact. It's easy to get through. I think that that sounds like a great format. And again, yeah, looking forward to reading. We've got a couple of comments and questions in the chat. First is from Tiffany, who just wanted to reiterate that this is going to be great to have something, that's going to be useful for folks who are getting started, and also, for folks that have been doing this for a while, a good refresher. So exciting to have this going. Another message in the chat from Allison. Who's interested in a copy of the slides? Absolutely. We can definitely send this out, and I would be, we're recording this, of course, so we can make the recordings available, but also we'll make sure to send out some slides as well, if that's all right with you, Lucy and Doug, to distribute that.
Sure.
Great. Perfect. Next up, looks like Greg has his hand up. Greg, you want to state your question?
Yeah, so I actually have a couple questions, but the first one was, Lucy, you talked about not having, or you made some comment about like the east, wetlands not being a huge issue in the east. I just was wondering if you could explain that a little more.
I think, yeah, as it was coming out my mouth, I realized that was simply not true. I'm not sure why the focus ended up being on the roundtable members from mostly the West. I'm not sure. Yeah, Linda, maybe you could help out.
Yeah, I could speak to that. So this is my guess. So I do notice that, so EPA's Region 6 is in sort of the Mississippi Valley in the southeast area. We may not have done as good a job of recruitment there as we could have, but also in Region 3 and Region 1, I believe, There are tribes, but they have very, very, very small land holdings. And so because of the, the trauma history of taking lands in a lot of places in the country, a lot of the tribes are less land-based, and they don't have solid treaties like we do here in the Pacific Northwest. They don't have larger reservations, and so that may be part of it. We did try with the process that we used was reaching out to each of our EPA enhancing state and tribal program leads, who are the folks that work with all of the tribes and the states on programs. But in some of our regions, there's less of relationships there, and they just didn't ever get a response to as well in terms of the reach outs that were made. So that's part of it. It's not that there aren't any wetlands there. There are lots of wetlands, and wetlands are definitely an issue and concern.
So there were kind of two outreach moments, and one was outreach to get members on the round table that Linda's talking about, and she was instrumental in. And the other was outreach for the guide to get as many and as broadly representative case studies as we possibly could. And there we reached out aggressively to, especially to the Southeast and to the East Coast, and simply it just didn't seem to be a priority for the tribes we were able to reach. They were interested, they looked forward to seeing the guide, but simply didn't have the ability or the interest to pull together a case study, for instance, or look at the guide in a review way. So hopefully they will get a chance to use it and see it. But thanks very much for calling me on that. I deserved it. Thanks.
Oh yeah, that's okay. That's a little different than I was expecting. I thought it was something kind of like the difference, how like the National Wetland Condition Assessment rates Western wetlands lower than like Eastern wetlands, that whole thing. Anyway, my second question was an update schedule. You know how we have to have like our wetland program plan is a 6-year period. And Doug, you mentioned that the Aswm Handbook is about 8 years old, and I'm not very familiar with that document, but I don't know if it says, we're going to update this every 10 years. So that's kind of my question with this is maybe we just put like a sentence in it that says this will be updated at 10 years or as needed. I don't know if you could speak to that.
Yeah, Linda, I saw you twitch over there. Maybe do you have a thought about that?
You can go ahead. I don't actually have. I have some thoughts on that recommendation. But did you have other thoughts?
I mean, I do think that's probably an EPA. That's probably an EPA call. Personally, I think these things benefit from some periodic updating as policies and procedures change and the science evolves and all that. So, but
totally agree.
How to affect that would be kind of EPA's call, I think.
Yeah, and the challenge is having kind of a stagnant document with no clear system for updating it. Like you say, Greg, the 2013 Aswm Handbook is a number of years old. We're doing this new tribally centered guide, but it's also, it's going to be electronically available, but it's also going to be like a PDF, if you will. So not having an institutional framework for committing funding or having a source to do that might take some effort from the outside or from the regions, again, putting an ask and set aside of funding to prioritize that to be done, but certainly it is a high priority. The one thing that I do want to mention though that is happening and has been happening, and how this guide is visualized to fit in to sort of the EPA frame, and I don't think it's spoken to in the guide, but EPA has our enhancing or enhanced state and tribal programs initiative, in which our wetland program development grants are under that, plus the people like me that are the tribal leads provide technical assistance to tribes to help tribes develop their wetland program plans or their wetland program management plans. And within that framework is the core element framework that the ASWM guide speaks to specifically. The 4 EPA core elements of monitoring, assessments, voluntary restoration protection, regulatory and water quality standards for wetlands. Those are all being refreshed. So EPA's ESTP site on our website is being refreshed to update. And I'm not sure when it's going to actually, these are actually going to be loaded onto our website, but the Enhancing State and Tribal Programs team at EPA, which includes Rebecca Dills at EPA headquarters, and then at least 1 or more representatives from each of our 10 regions, have been working very hard on updating the core elements framework to have drop-down menus for actions and activities that could be selected by a tribe or a state in terms of focusing your programs and then populating your wetland program plan using those actions and activities in those tables. Those tables have been created. They haven't been uploaded to our website yet, but they will be. And it's intended to provide states and tribes with a tool for looking at ways to develop your wetland program plan or update your wetland program plan. And to also, it's going to be refreshed similar to what this guide is providing to recognize tribal cultural values, tribal traditional ecological knowledge throughout the document. So rather than updating the ASWM guide, it's going to be the tools on EPA's core element framework website that's hopefully going to have some of this refresh or update, if you will. It has been stalled at EPA headquarters in terms of review, and we're really down a lot of staff. We're very, very limited in terms of our non-regulatory staff right now, but the goal is to get that updated to be a tool for everybody. Hopefully that helps. And that's the thing that could be looked at to hopefully see a format of, okay, my core element is going to be monitoring and assessment, and here's a task and timeline, and here's the priorities that I want to do. I want to develop a rapid assessment protocol, and I want to do that, over 4 years or whatever. But to do that first, I need to sort of the stepwise process. Same for water quality standards for wetlands. There'll be more of some stepwise process drop-down menu to choose from that makes sense in a linear way over a time frame.
Well, it sounds like maybe it'll just be a wait and see, and maybe in 10 years, if hopefully TWIG is still around, we'll maybe propose that changes need to be made.
Yeah, in terms of this document, that it would be an initiative by TWIG probably or other tribes asking for that. And then what we do is at the regions, if we hear that, we ask for funding from headquarters to prioritize that, and then we work together with them on a contract or a task order under a contract.
Thanks, Linda. I appreciate that. Rue, did you have your hand up briefly earlier? Just wanted to make sure that you were able to ask a question if you had one.
I had my hand up. I was just kind of reiterating with how easy it is to look at the guide, and how if your program maybe not be looking into regulatory, maybe more monitoring, you could go to that section and actually be more specific. I was just kind of piggybacking about what Matt was saying. I feel like it will be really easy and very logical to find stuff and very helpful. And I feel like it will help even people that have programs already existing, because a lot of us get in these silos where you're only doing monitoring, but you want to go to those other venues on the core elements, but it's hard to see that for your tribe. So there's some great examples there. So I feel like it's going to be really, really helpful. So that was only that's why I left it down. I know we're getting close to time, so thank
Yeah,
you.
appreciate that. Thank you, Rue. Thanks for adding that in. Yeah, I hate to cut us short, but we are running a little bit behind today, and I want to make sure that we can let some of our presenters go who need to be at other engagements today. I want to say again, thank you so much, Lucy, Doug, Matt, and Linda for speaking to the guide today. We will make this available through our listserv, hot off the presses. We're going to be keeping in touch with Lucy and Doug to make sure that you get that when it's ready. We're also going to make the links available on our website. So if you're here and with the TWIG, we will definitely be in touch when this is ready to be looked at by the wider audience. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jimmy, for running the slideshow.
No problem.
Great to see you all.
Thank you.
All right. So I want to make sure that we still get a little bit of a break here before we head into our next group of talks. Why don't we all meet back here around 10:30? Still give us a little bit of time to freshen up our coffee, use the bathroom, do whatever it is you need to do. And when we come back, we're going to hear a little bit more of on-the-ground applications in terms of wetland programs, since we've had such a great overview of kind of wetland programs in general. So we'll see you all back at 10:30. And thanks so much. All right, everyone.
Hello.
We'll give everybody just another minute to kind of get back online, and then we will get started. It looks like we might have a new person joining us. Haba, are you there?
Hi, yes. Sorry, I'm a bit late this morning.
Oh, not a problem at all. Happy to have you drop by. Can you tell us a little bit about who you're affiliated with and where you're calling in from today?
Yeah, I'm the fisheries biologist for Yakutat Tlingit tribe in Yakutat, Alaska.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Are you on our like Seattle time, or are you a couple hours later?
It's 9:30 here.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Earlier is what I mean. Yes, just a little bit earlier. Great. Yeah, appreciate you coming in this early morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, folks, yeah, let's get back into it. A little bit of preamble to our next three speakers. We wanted to have some folks who are tribal staff give some talks about the work that they are doing on the ground and in their programs to support their tribes and their wetlands. Our first talk is going to be from Heather Bartlett, who you have probably heard from before. She is one of our steering committee members. She is also the environmental specialist for the Cow Creek Umpqua tribe, and she is going to be giving us a talk about our mitigation banking. Heather, I'm curious, before we get started, do you know how many tribes have mitigation banking programs like the one you have? Is yours fairly novel, or is this something that you have seen other tribes doing as well?
I only know of two, and they're both in Washington.
Great. Well, that's good. So we're really excited to hear a little bit more about this because this is still, breaking new ground. All right, let us know if you're having any trouble with the share screen. Jimmy, is Heather a presenter with access?
Oh, I thought that you guys had my presentation.
Oh, we do.
I can do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do it or we can do it. Either way is fine.
Yeah,
that might be easier right now because I'm on my laptop.
Sure.
No worries.
And finding the presentation I sent you was difficult this morning.
Not a problem. We've got it for you.
All right. Can you see that?
Perfect. And I apologize, I did not change the title. I did this presentation for the National Mitigation Banking Conference in North Carolina this year. So that is why that did not change yet. So are you ready?
We're ready. Let's get going.
Okay. Perfect. So I've worked with the Cow Creek Umpqua tribe since 2011. I am a tribal member for the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in South Dakota. I've been the environmental specialist for the same amount of time, but within that time period, I worked on the invasive species program, wetlands, and water quality. I started the wetlands program in 2013. So just a little bit of background. But in case people are unfamiliar with where Cow Creek Umpqua tribe is, it's in Southwest Oregon. The ancestral territory lands, kind of the west side is the Coast Range, the east side is the Cascades, and then we go up into Lane County just a little bit, and then down into just a tiny bit of Northern California. The orange on this map is a representation of the tribal fee lands and trust lands. Currently, there is about 22,000 acres in trust and roughly 8,000 acres in fee land. You can go to the next slide. So this is an overview. In 2012, I applied for the Wetland Program Development Grant to write the Wetland Program Plan. That was approved in 2013 or 14, I can't quite remember. I have not updated that plan since then. Kind of got a little busy. So in kind of the next path we went down was in 2013, we applied for our second Wetland Program Development Grant, because that was the year that EPA went from every year offering Wetland Program Development Grants to every 2 years. So we didn't want to get started on the Wetland Program Plan in 2012 and then have to wait until 3 years later for the second round. So we applied again in 2013 to get started on an inventory of what wetland resources we have on tribal lands. So in order to better understand wetland habitat and resources, I completed the PSU professional certification courses for wetland delineation, and I received that certificate in 2015. So that way I could do a combination of an inventory and a delineation. And I did that on and off tribal lands. And I say off tribal lands because there was an area that the tribe was attempting to make their reservation lands. And eventually that did happen in 2019 with the Western Oregon kind of Reclaim Lands Act. So I worked with the local BLM office to do wetland inventories on roughly, it was about 18,000 acres. And I identified a lot of those wetlands through the NWI and if I could, soil mapping to soil surveyed. So it's very interesting to go, I've gone back to look at some of those locations again recently. And we've talked about this before, the NWI is not the most accurate for forested areas, especially shrub wetlands. And so I've discovered some new areas that need to be mapped and delineated. So it's always fun. Never know what you're going to find out in the field. So in 2000, let's see, I'm trying to think. 2017 was when I started doing more monitoring. So I installed, let's see, four monitoring wells at one site and 4 monitoring wells at another site. Later on, I dropped one of the sites and just focused on one of the kind of higher altitude bog wetlands that was a culturally significant location for the tribe. And I've been continuously monitoring that for the last 4 years now. And then in 2017, we applied for a mitigation banking feasibility study, which was not funded. I actually applied for both the regional and the national. Scored better on the national, but still it wasn't funded. And really that feasibility study was to kind of help us determine if a mitigation bank was profitable for the tribe. But we still went down that route of developing a mitigation bank. So the Wetland Mitigation Bank, kind of a little bit into that. The last mitigation banking credits were sold in 2012 for Douglas County. We started the delineations in 2017 with a Portland environmental firm, and we submitted the first prospectus in 2018. We had to go through 3 iterations of the prospectus, and that got approved in January 2019. We submitted the first mitigation banking instrument in April 2021, and currently working through the second draft of the MBI, which we were wanting to submit this month, but we have some roadblocks currently. Next slide. So this is the location where I'm doing the, I guess I kind of switched back and forth on this presentation. This is part of the monitoring program. So this is the Red Top Bog, which is the culturally significant area. Around July, the wetland is covered in camas, greater camas. So you can go to the next slide. This was another just forested shrub wetland in a similar area. Just kind of a little bit of an idea of what type of wetlands that I see in Southwest Oregon and on tribal lands. Next slide. This is a, I just call it the pond, Lily Pond. There's no permanent name for this. This was another pond that was kind of discovered in the reservation lands that the tribe took over. It could be really good western pond turtle habitat, which is a significantly important species for the tribe. And when I went out there this summer, about 2 months ago, I noticed that the bank is actually eroding. You can't quite see it in the photo, but I think we're gonna have to do some restoration, or else the slope is gonna, the bank is gonna collapse and it's gonna start to fill in the pond. So it's something to think about in the future for us. Next slide. So back to the mitigation bank. The property is not in trust. It's fee land. We felt that it would be easier to have our first bank be on fee lands and not trust lands. When you have trust lands, you need to work with the BIA on the process. So we wanted to kind of simplify the process and just focus on fee lands first. Currently, the land is being used for agriculture. They did their last cutting this summer, and the plan is now for us to basically take over the management of the property. It's just a little over 50 acres. There is a central salmonid habitat for coho for winter, overwintering habitat. The wetland credits is actually less now. I think we're sitting at like 18.7 credits, and the stream credits are at 0.35. The graph below is just a little bit of a breakdown of the different types of mitigation that we're looking to do, existing accordion and proposed cordon habitat types. And then you can see the little fat coho, juvenile coho that we found in, let's see, it would have been March 2019, I believe it was, that we did the electrofishing, and we're able to verify that there was coho in the stream. Next slide. So this is my last slide. This is a drone. We did a drone flyover in, this would have been October 2020. I wanted to get some video and still shots of the property before implementation starts, really to be able to see that before and after. There will be a huge change. So to the left, we have I-5 running south and north. to the south is an industrial park that is owned by Douglas County. They are actually looking to build up that property, and in order to do so, they're going to need to buy credits because they're within the 100-year flood zone. And then just to the let's see, to the east is a blueberry farm, and they have been pretty easy to work with. They are organic, which helps the project and our conversations with DSL and the Army Corps. The rental house that you can see in the photo is owned by the tribe, and the plan is to tear that house down. There's a lot of, there's not structural issues with the house, but there is kind of a funky setup where the water that, the pipe that supplies water to the house actually comes from the blueberry farm property, and they've been paying the electricity on that pump forever. So the blueberry farm actually would appreciate if we did take the house out so they didn't have to have that pipe running under their fields and paying for the electricity. I wish I would have included the designs for this. So you can kind of see there's the Trib 1 goes from under I-5, enters through ODOT property, right-of-way property, and then onto the lines, and then it exits out at the South Umpqua River through a sheep farm. And then there's kind of a straight line ditch that was put in place a long time ago for draining the field. And so, and then within this photo, you can see the remnants of wetlands throughout the field, kind of those wet spots and also some of the depressions. So it's been a lengthy process starting in 2017, and we're still not completed. And when I gave this presentation at the Mitigation Banking conference, there was quite a few people that came forward trying to figure out how to make this process easier for tribes, because the way, at least for Oregon, the way that the Oregon administrative rules are written, they're not helpful for tribes and how tribes work, especially when it comes to conservation easements. The tribe said no to a conservation easement, and that probably took a year to have those conversations with the Department of Justice to determine that the tribe is actually a local government and not a private entity. So we fall under government guidelines, but the legal part of it has taken extremely long time to get through and kind of understand the OAR rules and how DSL interprets them. And then you have a whole nother set of rules that the federal government follows, and sometimes they don't match up. So that's been a very lengthy process. The goal is to get the mitigation bank implemented this next summer and be able to use those funds to really build on the wetland program and be able to do things that we can't do with wetland program development grants. And that mainly is focused on restoration and conservation. Those are, you can't do that with wetland program development funds. And so there's kind of ways around it where you can have like a pilot study and do it that way, but it's not sustainable. So we were really looking for an option that was sustainable, and also to kind of get this first bank under our wings and be able to build on this and potentially do a second bank. The county needs mitigation banks. They're, like I said, the last credits were sold in 2012. The state pre-sold credits for their in lieu fee program, and they're actually in trouble because they don't have a bank. And there's all these construction projects going on that are impacting wetlands, and they have pre-sold those credits without actually gaining wetlands. So they've been losing wetland acres instead of gaining. And so it's an interesting process. At times I want to like bang my head against the wall because it's just this back and forth with DSL and our legal team and Army Corps and trying to understand where everyone is coming from. So like I said, right now we're in the process of getting our second draft completed, working through a couple of different agreements, and hopefully the second draft will be submitted very soon. And then it's a waiting period after that, and they can come back and say that we need to make more changes to the mitigation banking instrument. And I forgot to mention that I was able to get my professional wetland scientist certification in February 2021. And really what I focused on for that was the monitoring, delineation categories, and then a little bit of the mitigation banking. So this whole project has really helped me grow professionally and find different avenues for wetland work. So I think I probably went over time. I apologize. There's a lot to this project and the wetland program.
We appreciate you, Heather. Thank you so much for this talk. And thank you so much for including that final slide. I love seeing a good before photo of where there's going to be some really awesome restoration in the future. Thanks for that. Do we have any questions for Heather before we head on to our next presentation? Go ahead and, oh, great. Ashley, take the floor.
Hi, Heather. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. It's good to see familiar faces and names.
It's good to see you. So I had, I guess, since I've been out of the game for a little while, a question on if you would recommend pursuing, it sounds like you guys have kind of had some headaches there, pursuing wetland mitigation banking. I mean, because we just acquired a piece of property that's designated Coho critical habitat. There's currently no development on it. We don't plan to develop it. And in fact, we'd like to probably plant some trees and get it back to more habitat that's even more Coho friendly. So what would your recommendation be on pursuing wetland mitigation banking?
I kind of heard a combination of wetland and stream. Are you thinking more stream credits?
Well, it is, the wetland is next to what's called Coal Bank Slough. So, I mean, it is, it gets inundated like twice a day because it's kind of the riverine, but it's still influenced by the bay. So I guess, would it be in that case stream credits?
It could be both, actually.
Okay.
I think kind of the first step that seemed to really help was knowing what your county has for mitigation banks and what the need is. That was really the first part. For us, we needed to sell it to the tribal board, and we needed to kind of give them the scenarios of this property cannot be built on. If you sold it, you would not make much money back because it's in the 100-year flood zone, and we could make more money on the property making it a mitigation bank, and on top of it, the county needed mitigation banks. So it really depends on how your tribal board works, but for us, we really needed to kind of do that background, looking into what banks were currently in the county, what needs the county had, and you know, we've already had the people coming forward asking like, when's your bank going to be ready? When can we buy credit? So we kind of have that, that helped a lot with the process and getting that upfront funds from the board to really pay for the contract, pay for the consulting firm and pay for the delineations, and then get down that process. So I really think that that should be your first kind of step, like see what your county needs, and if it, and I mean, it's not only an economical thing, right? It's also an ecological, cultural, piece to it too. But you do need money to make it to build, a wetland and to build a program, and that's really, I think, one of the, it's a risk. Mitigation banking, it's still a business and it's still a risk, and so you never know if you're going to make back what you've put in. And so I would be interested to see what Coos County has currently and what their needs are. And you can have those conversations with like Department of State Lands, or your local, county planning department, city planning departments. They'll know that information and know. And then from there, it's really kind of going through that whole delineation process, hiring a contractor to help you that's done mitigation banks and can really help guide the process. In the long run, you'll save money when you work with someone that's been through the process.
Are you guys still able to like harvest culturally significant species after this wetland mitigation banking goes in? Like, I don't know what you guys have on the property. Like, for example, like cattail comes to mind. Are you guys still able to harvest cattail for weaving and for food and stuff?
Yeah, so that's part of the mitigation bank, the long-term management plan, is once the last credits are sold and we've met all of our monitoring metrics, what we have to meet in order to sell credits. The plan is to actually have cultural type events out there where like demonstrations on harvesting and using cattails, and identifying plants is another thing. We have the South Umpqua High School is like within 100 yards of the mitigation bank, and there's a lot of tribal kids that go to the high school. And so I really see this being an educational, not only culturally, but also ecologically, for kids and honestly, anyone that's interested. We need spots that we know are safe to pick, as you probably know. So a big part of it will be like controlling the noxious weeds in the beginning and then phasing that out so that there's a safer kind of time frame for picking, and there's herbicide residuals have fallen out, and we know that there's that it's safe. So the planting list is heavy on the culturally important plants. So cattails is definitely one of them. And there are cattails there now, but once we get to like grading and digging, probably a lot of that might be lost. So we'll have to replant. But yeah, no, we'll still be able to collect. Yeah.
Sounds like a great project.
Yeah, I hope it actually happens. We'll see. Thanks for the questions.
Thanks, Ashley. Next up, can I pass it to Allison?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Heather. I empathize with you. In the in lieu fee program, we were held up for about a year on the issue of conservation easements.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really eager and interested to talk to you about that, because it sounds like there was slightly different approach. So maybe I can talk with you online. I was interested to see your showing of stream credits, and I was wondering if that is through the EPA developed stream?
Aswm.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so the stream credits has still not been vetted through the process because Oregon only has a kind of draft. Like they have the SFAN process determined, right? So we followed the SFAN protocol, the contractor and me. But as far as when it came to actually determine how many credits we had, they told us it was up to us. And so it's kind of like, okay, well, do you do acre wise or do you do feet? And so I've talked to different people on the, you know, pros and cons of each. So DSL and Army Corps both have not commented on our credits and how they, if they work for them, if they agree with them. So that's been a little bit of a shadow looming over us. We don't quite know if they're gonna approve the number of credits that we determined. But yeah, it is SFAM based.
And the last question is just, are you envisioning that to be a forested wetland when you're completed, or is it going to be a combination over the 50 acres of different wetland types?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's going to be a combination. So we have the depressional kind of wet prairie areas, and then we have some forested shrub areas, mainly in the kind of along the stream corridor. And then the upland areas will be more of an upland forested area. So yeah, so it's a combination of the forested shrub and depressional kind of wet prairie areas.
Thanks for your question, Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Allison.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Heather. Great presentation. Appreciate you taking the time to be here today. I hate to cut our conversation short, but I do want to make sure that our other presenters have time. So I am going to turn it over to Bridger Cohen from the Yakama Nation. And Bridger, really happy to have you here today as well, because he kind of got his arm twisted a little bit by some of the folks on the steering committee to give this presentation, which is a little bit more of kind of a lessons learned programmatic view of, wetlands. So take it away, Bridger.
I do what I'm voluntold. All right, let's see. Can I share a screen here?
Yeah, you should be able to. Otherwise, I'm happy to pull it up.
Okay, let me know if it's not showing up for folks.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, my name is Bridger Cohen, work for the Yakama Nation Wildlife Program as the Wetlands Restoration Biologist. And so I'm kind of in charge of the wetlands side of things here, and kind of want to go through a little bit just about the program generally and some issues that I've noticed. A little bit of a caveat, I've only been here about 2 years. So some things are just new to me, I think, generally, but some things maybe problems with our program that other folks can relate to, and some thoughts about how to potentially overcome those. So I see this definitely not as gospel or anything like that, but hopefully a good conversation starter and maybe a few things that folks can take away. So a little bit of history on our program. Things really got going with our wetlands program all the way back in the 70s. And there was a
Hey,
vision
Bridger,
basically.
are you switching to the next slide? We're still seeing the first one.
Well, it should be showing. Let me see here. Is it?
There we go.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, so the vision originally was to have a network of wildlife refuges that were along the agricultural waterways in the reservation. So there's a closed area up in the hills that's mostly protected, but the lowlands in the reservation are generally ag land. And so the goal was to get some of those back into native wetland habitat and provide wildlife habitat, fish habitat, and then also a place where tribal members could do traditional gathering practices. It really didn't take off until the 90s when the tribe was able to acquire some funding and be able to get some properties under their management. And then we've kind of been building on that ever since. So the 4 primary goals we have, a little bit wordy, so I'm just abbreviating them here. We have land acquisition. So trying to get about 27,000 acres under tribal management. We do restoration projects on those properties. Often they start out just as ag fields, like Heather was showing. And then doing adaptive management, so fire when we can, although that's tricky, a lot of mowing, a lot of invasive species treatment, and finally monitoring our properties to make sure that we're getting the habitat values we want out of them. And we've had some notable successes out of that 27,000 acre goal. We have over 21,000 acres of habitat that's been protected. Not all of it is wetlands, but a decent chunk is, and much of it is at least within the floodplain. We've restored wetland habitat on 2 pretty large former agricultural properties. And we have done a lot of other restoration projects as well on slightly smaller scales. We support tribal gathering opportunities. You can see some folks in the bottom there harvesting tules. We also have a lot of wapato, cattail, berries, things like that. There's a decent amount of tribal hunting on the wetland properties, and then also a very popular public hunting season that we manage. We deal with invasive species on these properties, and that's given the agricultural kind of context of the landscape, that's a never-ending battle, but we do our best. We collaborate with other tribal programs, so we have a very strong fisheries program, and then also water resources and environmental other programs to do some work. And then we also collaborate with outside agencies, so WDFW to an extent, more so the federal agencies, and then also nonprofits like Ducks Unlimited, doing ecological assessments in the basin and other types of research. So a few difficult trends that I've noticed in my relatively short time here. One is that the program it's kind of in an interesting place. It's relatively young. It's only about 30 years old, and it's sort of modern incarnation, but it's not actually new. So a lot of that foundational work has already been done, and now we're kind of in this transition to middle age, which is an interesting challenge. It's a pretty small program, probably not relative to many of the tribal wetlands programs, but compared to my background professionally is with federal agencies, which are very large and have their own set of issues to deal with, but they do benefit from some economies of scale, which we don't have here. And then just in absolute terms, we're a pretty small program. And also, and this was something that was sort of called out, certainly is true for us and sounds like may be true for other folks as well, is that our program has very high turnover, at least in the last couple of years. So as far as the program age, how this kind of translates into potentially some issues on the ground is that we have a lot of research and monitoring that we'd like to do, and the protocols and the data sets for those in many cases are pretty underdeveloped. It's easy, you have funding for a couple of years, you do a cool set of assessments, and then you lose that funding and you can't go back to it. And maybe, years down the line you do, but then you end up using a different protocol, and it results in a lot of kind of piecemeal data collection. And it's nobody's fault in particular, but it is difficult to use that to do much in the way of assessments or planning. We are young, but old enough where a lot of the work that was done initially in the 90s, putting in water control structures on some of the properties, putting in other elements of wetland restoration, those are falling apart now. And that's the natural life cycle, but it does mean a lot of our infrastructure needs repair. So you can see in this picture, a culvert has rusted out and it's taken out a good part of the road with it. And so things like that, not necessarily the most exciting work, but definitely problematic if you don't take care of it. We're also a little bit in a stage of transition where originally we were focused very heavily on acquisition and getting that 27,000 acres under tribal management. And now that we have succeeded, in large part in doing that, we're faced with a new challenge, which is managing all those properties. And as we move forward, the amount of money that you have for acquisition kind of dwindles because you end up spending a lot of it on management of the existing properties. So our budgets, we're fairly fortunate, I think, in our budget. However, it is not increased commensurate to the workload, and that's also a challenge. Program size. So really, economies of scale. We have about 2 biologists, maybe 6 folks that are out in the field doing a lot of the work out there, and then we also support a few admin staff. But it's it's about 10 people total, and compare that to like WDFW here in Washington that has maybe over 2,000 employees. and they have a lot more area to take care of. It's true, but they do, you know, they have the flexibility with that many staff to have some specialists. You could have, you know, a hydrogeomorphology expert and a waterfowl behavior expert. We just don't have, you know, that kind of capability here. So that's just something we have to work around with those economies of scale. Our field staff really are responsible for a huge area. You know, 6 folks, 21,000 acres. Those properties are very split up, and you know, from one property to another, if you kind of did the max distance, you know, might be an hour or something. That's, you know, that's if you're not dragging a tractor behind you. So keeping up on all that management is tricky. Our core funding is generally allocated. So if you want to, say, hire a new staff member or do a particular project, then you need to find new funding or make some sort of trade-off there in the budget. So that's a challenge. And then there's a lot of red tape, both, you know, within the tribe has its own set of standards, but then also we need to deal with federal permitting. And then if we are receiving funding from an outside agency, often they have their own set of requirements that go along with that. So potentially 3 sets of rules to comply with. And as folks have mentioned, they're not always aligned, which is a tricky thing to deal with. And finally, staff turnover. So this is just before I was hired in 2019. This is our staff photo. 2 years later, everybody with a red square has moved on. So about a 35–40% turnover in 2 years, which is quite a lot. And often they're still with the tribe, but in other programs, or they've retired. And so, you know, it's not that they're totally gone, but you can't just walk down the hall and get their thoughts about something. So it's a trick. Really, the problems that stem from that breakdown of institutional knowledge. So when you have these people that, you know, worked here a long time, really expert with when you're different things that need to be done within the program, expert in the properties themselves, and you lose that, or at least, you know, it becomes difficult to access. I found that our shared files, as far as, you know, what's on the computer, it tends to get a little spiderwebby because, and you know, I'm certainly guilty of this, as you come in, there's some files that are available, but it's not clear how things are organized very well. So you start to build your own kind of network of files that nobody else understands how to use. And, you know, so on and so on, as you get people moving in and out, you kind of get this little silos of information, but it's hard to know what's going on the system as a whole. Chain of command can be a little unclear, especially, you know, myself coming into a position where I'm supervising people that have been here for years and years, have a ton of experience. And so navigating those dynamics is tricky from time to time. Communication, just when folks are moving out, in and out, it's hard to develop those relationships and be able to have really clear communication with people right off the bat. So that's another trick as well. All right, what to do? I wish that I had super clear answers for all of these. I certainly don't, but here's some thoughts I've put together, and maybe they'll echo with you. So as far as the program's age, I think one just kind of small thing is to have some sort of document or just a, you know, internal monologue about the program's history, and making that really accessible for new folks and even, you know, field staff. I think if you're, you know, out there mucking out some culvert, you know, kind of don't understand why you're doing that, and having a little bit of background on maybe why that was originally installed, what its importance is, and just that historical context, I think, can be useful, and just making those tasks a little bit more pleasant and understandable. As far as research and monitoring type tasks, you know, it's always good to keep innovating your methods, but trying to make sure that you can tie into historical data that's been collected where you can, at least that, you know, the type and the format of data that you're collecting can tie into those, even if the protocol is a little bit different. Really embracing those, you know, not quite as exciting middle-age responsibilities. So doing the infrastructure assessments, doing the repair work, and maybe, you know, having to focus a little bit less on these exciting new projects as a result. But I really do think that's something that needs to be done in a program this age. And then also just trying to seek out new funding. If you do want to expand and grow, that's how you do it. Program size, really just focusing your goals, don't overextend. This is something I have to keep telling myself. Leveraging outside expertise and equipment. And for us in the Yakima, we have a lot of tribal organizations like fisheries and water resources that we can use, but also folks outside the tribe that have that expertise and equipment. And then, and this relates to staff turnover a little bit. We have, a lot of people that have been working here in pretty similar positions for a long time, and they have a lot of experience, but they don't have a good opportunity for promotion because we are so small. There's not a big pyramid you can kind of work your way up. It's really just a handful of staff and then me at this point. And so making sure that the people do have the opportunity to receive other trainings, get that sort of status and a little bit of pay bump, and see themselves as moving up in the program. And to the extent that you can't, alleviate staff turnover, I think just having a very solid system and structure in place so that when you are bringing new people on board, they know where they fit in, they know where they can find help, where they can be helpful, I think is really important to have that to be clear from the outset. And finally, just, communication is always key in any organization, and we're no different. So those are kind of my thoughts. And with that, I'd love to hear yours and any questions you have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bridger. Your presentation was incredibly relatable, talking about, needing to take care of those projects that you already have, not overextending, not just going for those new shiny projects. Those are things I'm always trying to tell myself as well.
It's so tempting.
It is very tempting. Are there any other questions or thoughts you want to share with Bridger? Allison, do you have your hand up from the last one, or are you raising your hand for? Oh, great.
Yeah, that was from the last time. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, feel free to throw your hand up or say something in the chat. Janice.
I was curious, Bridger, you mentioned your staff. Is that natural resources staff in total, or was that your wetlands program staff? I'm assuming natural resources staff.
No, that's actually the wetlands program staff. Several of the staff that we support do a lot of work with other programs within wildlife, especially the admin staff. But so there's myself and another biologist, and then the 6 kind of field staff, and those are pretty tightly associated with the wetlands program, just given our funding source and those restrictions.
And are those positions all funded through grant funding, or do you have base funding?
Kind of in an odd spot. I think technically it's grant funding, but it's kind of mitigation funding from DPA, so it's very stable. And I think we're definitely in a pretty sweet spot because of that. But it's stable but not increasing, more than inflation is. So it makes it hard to grow the program.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Linda, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, hi. So Bridger, you guys have an amazing wetland riparian restoration program, and it's super helpful to hear about it, both the history, its longevity, and kind of the lessons learned. And you haven't had, Yakima Indian Nation hasn't had a wetland program development grant from EPA specifically. So I just wanted to clarify that for Janice and others since I think maybe 2007.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Something like that. And so what's really interesting and cool to me, and I think interesting to others as well, is how you said BPA is a source of funding, and that's its own complicated history. But how you do develop this really ongoing program focus on land use management and protection of aquatic ecosystems, including wildlife habitat, which includes wetlands for both cultural and other purposes, is very unique, I think. And so I just wanted to compliment you on that. You and I know each other because of the permits that you request from the Corps of Engineers, and I have the dubious honor, I guess, of being the 401 Water Quality Certifying Authority for the Yakima Nation right now until you guys get treatment as a state and 401 authority. So I get to see a lot of these awesome restoration projects, but otherwise we wouldn't really have a relationship with my program. So I think, maybe as a follow-on, folks may be interested in learning. I know I would be. I know others that were on the National Tribal Wetland Workshop in September would be interested in, what is the patchwork of funding that you put together, to achieve these wetland protection, acquisition, and wetland restoration and management goals and objectives, and how does that work? Because it's a very unique model from what I can see.
So, oh gosh, it's unique and it's a little complicated. So we get kind of our base funding that pays for all of our staff salary and quite a bit of our general maintenance and upkeep type funding needs from BPA. And then there is some overhead there generally year to year to do project work and also to pay leases on the properties themselves. So most of the properties that we manage, maybe all of them, we don't, as the wildlife program, we don't technically own. We have a land enterprise program here at the tribe that is the sort of official land ownership program. And we have some kind of cheats where like we get money to purchase it and then we give it to land enterprise, they buy it and we lease it from them for like 100 years. So we get to say we're leasing it, but really we have that long-term management. And that's something that's super important because when you're doing restoration projects, like you don't want to lease from a private landowner for 15 years, spend 5 years getting permitting and funding and implementing a project, and then they put it back into hay or whatever afterwards. So having really long leases is important. We have had, it's a little unclear, kind of a investment account, which allowed us to roll over interest into leases year to year that we're trying to rework at the moment. And then also we get a lot of project specific funding. I know we have a big chunk from the NRCS right now and from other funding agencies. It's always very complicated because we historically, the tribe for good reason, has not wanted to interact directly with the state, but there is a lot of money at the state level for wetland restoration and wetland protection. And so we have various ways of funneling that through federal agencies so that we can use that. And that's another source. So that we kind of have stable funding for the program basics, and then anything on top of that, we need to seek out additional funding is really what it comes down to.
Your the base program funding that you get from EPA, like EPA GAP 319, 106, are probably funding other programs other than yours. Is that true?
They definitely fund other Yakima Nation programs, and I assume throughout the Columbia Basin. It's all mitigation money for the damage that those dams have caused. So that's it.
Interesting. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Linda. And thank you, Bridger. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thanks for being here today. I want to keep scooting along again. Sorry to cut our question and answer session short, but I want to make sure Amanda's got plenty of time to give her presentation as well. So I'd like to introduce Amanda Summers. I guess we've all introduced each other already, but Amanda Summers, who is the wildlife biologist for the Stillwamish tribe. I want to give her an opportunity to talk about her program and her newest wetland program development grant and what their plans are for that. Go ahead, Amanda.
Can you see my screen, or is it just me still?
It's just you still not seeing that screen yet.
Okay.
I can also pull it up too if you need it, Amanda.
You don't have my version with notes, so let me. I thought it would be more self-explanatory than this.
I think down in like the bottom, there's the chat icon, and then there should be a green.
Got it.
Yeah.
The real obvious one. Okay.
No worries.
Okay. Do you see my notes version or? Yes, you do. Let me switch screens.
Yeah, I think you sometimes have to click which screen you want to share and then actually click the share button.
Did I fix it?
No, not seeing it.
Okay. Mm.
Woohoo!
Can see your desktop. Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Well, I'm Amanda Summers. I am a wildlife biologist with the Stillwamish Tribe, Department of Natural Resources. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the tribe's wetland program in its current form. And I am new to working with the wetlands program. And so I'm also going to talk a little bit about how we will be expanding the program's capacity to include estuarine wetlands and address challenges related to the recovery of treaty resources, and specifically waterfowl, shorebirds, and land birds that are dependent on estuarine wetlands. So we are integrating our project with an effort led by Washington Audubon and the PSEMP, Marine Birds Work Group. And it's aimed at developing a regional avian monitoring framework in the Salish Sea estuaries. And so this work is going to occur under our current Wetlands Program Development Grant. So just for some context, the Stillwamish watershed is situated in the northwest portion of Washington State in Snoqualmie County. And that used to be about an hour's drive north of Seattle. It takes a little bit longer these days. The watershed drains about 1,800 square kilometers and contains 5,000 kilometers of river, stream, and shoreline habitat. The Stillwamish watershed historically supported approximately 11,790 hectares of wetland, and only 21% of those remain. The tribe received its first wetland program development grant in 2015, and the focus at that time was on monitoring and assessment core elements, initially level 1 and 2, landscape and rapid assessments, and primarily targeting freshwater wetlands. And the objective of the WPP are centered around monitoring and assessment of wetlands on tribal properties to establish a baseline, with hope that the information could be used to adaptively manage these properties and guide future acquisition and restoration activities. To date, the tribe has surveyed and monitored 8 wetlands of different classes located on tribal properties. And so we'll just switch gears and start talking about the future and how the wildlife program is getting involved with the wetlands program. So as with all tribes in the Northwest, salmon are critical to the culture and well-being of the Stillwamish people. Much of the work the Natural Resources Department does is framed around salmon recovery. And salmon were listed as threatened on the Stillwamish River in 1999 and return at less than 10% of their historic escapement. The Chinook recovery plan is a document that the tribe and a group of other people, the county and some nonprofits, developed, and it identifies estuarine habitat as a limiting factor for recovery. And so much of the department's effort has been focused on restoration in historical wetland, estuarine wetlands. So the tribe has purchased 129 hectares of former tidal wetland with the intent to restore it. 36 acres have been currently restored, and there's another 217 hectares proposed. So the image is, if you know Western Washington at all, the image is east of Camano Island and just south of Stanwood and Skagit Bay. So Puget Sound plays an important role as wintering and migratory stopover habitat for estuarine birds in the Pacific Flyway. The increased focus and momentum of estuary habitat restoration, especially conversion from agriculture, led the wildlife program to wonder about the impacts on birds. In Puget Sound estuaries, birds make use of habitats across the tidal gradient and nearby agricultural areas for foraging, loafing, and protection. And given this complexity of use, current salmon-centric restoration practices have unknown benefits and consequences for shorebirds and waterfowl. And so luckily, when we started grappling with questions about restoration and its impact on avian species, we found a community of people who were also struggling with similar questions. And something else that we found was that there was a suite of common problems, such as funding and resources. Much of the funding in the Northwest is centered around salmon recovery, and often wildlife struggles to find resources necessary. We also found that commitment was an issue. Many people wanted to monitor birds. They would get started. They do pre or post monitoring, but they would never do both. There were disparate methodologies and then questions of spatial and temporal scale. And this question is specifically important because we're attempting to manage a migratory species or migratory species, and using data collected at a site level scale makes this challenging, because in order to do so effectively, since these birds are moving across the flyway, we need to have methods that are comparable. And so far, we haven't been meeting that need. We're currently lacking comparable methods. So over the course of several years, the tribe has partnered with Audubon, Washington Eco Studies, and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, working towards resolving some of these issues with the final goal of developing an avian monitoring framework that addresses shared regional priorities. Several documents have been produced in this effort, and the goal has been to get us closer to the point where we can develop the monitoring framework, better understand what is required of something that can be useful both regionally and at your site level restoration project scale. So some of those documents include an inventory of bird monitoring associated with tidal restoration, recommendations for standardized monitoring based on stakeholder input needs, and also our most recent project, we modeled avian habitat suitability in tidal wetlands, and also played with some restoration scenarios to see if we restored X amount of wetland, what kind of response could we expect to see in certain focal species. So this work, the Avian Monitoring and Estuaries Project and the work of the Snoqualmie Wetlands Program had been going on separately, and it just made sense to merge the two and broaden the effort and the opportunities available and the community that we could reach. And doing this in this way, I feel improves and expands the tribal program. It increases its capacity to manage for resilient treaty resources and is a demonstration of tribal leadership in Puget Sound recovery. So our next steps are, of course, the end goal would be to develop and pilot the avian monitoring framework, but we have a workshop coming up November 10th. And at this workshop, we're focusing on avian monitoring practitioners and managers in estuarine wetlands in the Salish Sea. It's an opportunity to share information about current research and monitoring efforts, not necessarily results, but more process oriented, and develop and deepen relationships with estuary avian monitoring community. And so I would welcome anyone who's interested in attending to reach out to me, and I will get you looped in. And I also have some links that I can share to some of those documents that I mentioned previously.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Great presentation. I think you make a really interesting point that we spend a lot of time and dollars on our salmon habitat restoration, and we're focused on salmon, we're focused on pollinators, and sometimes other wildlife does kind of get a little bit of the shaft when it comes to funding. So it's great to see that you have a program that's going to be really focused on improving those waterfowl populations. I'd like to open it up to questions for Amanda. Oh, I see Matt's got a hand up, a real hand.
Yeah, it was actually quicker than fun, but thanks for noticing. That was cool. Thanks, Amanda, for sharing that. I was curious, sorry if I missed it, but were you worked to some degree with Chapter or national version of Audubon, or how did that work? How did that work out for Stillwamish?
How did it work out to work with the national office?
Yeah, is that who you partnered with, or was it a local chapter? Or...
Well, we started off partnering with Washington Audubon, and the avian conservation director there, she also works for the national office, and so she was kind of a conduit to staff there. So the modeling project that we did, we worked with Nicole Mitchell at the national office, and it was challenging because it was during COVID. That's the only thing I would say, is that it would have been great to sit down together and meet face to face and hash out some of the project details. But other than that, they were and continue to be great to work with.
That's great. I also wanted to pull up, it looks like there's been some conversation in the chat for potentially all of our participants. I see something from Allison kind of asking a little bit more about how if in your programs you feel like these wetland program plans have helped you secure funding for wetland restoration and protection, if having those has been leading to some success in continuing the programs. I see that Matt's got his thoughts on this. You guys should take a read. This looks like good stuff, but I just wanted to open that up quickly to all of our folks to see if you have any thoughts on that. And that's a big question. So if you don't have answers today, that's totally fine. Linda, it sounds like you've got some thoughts on that.
So just, I think if I'm understanding the question right, and just from what I see, and again, this is sitting in the EPA's shoes and not in a tribal program shoes, but the wetland program development grants can be used for the planning of wetland restoration or aquatic resource restoration. They can fund the baseline monitoring and assessments, the original inventory, and identifying what the project's location is, what the project priorities might be, and developing a full-on restoration plan. So that can be funded by the wetland program development grants. And then in terms of implementation of a restoration project, the 319 non-point source funding source from EPA can be used, or many myriad of other sources that you all have access to with the BIA or the In the Yakima's case, the specific mitigation monies from the BPA due to the Columbia River, the impacts to from Columbia River dams. They have access to that. But it's a bit of a patchwork quilt, because you can use our grants for planning and monitoring and assessment, but you can't for implementation. So you can find other funding sources for the actual implementation of the restoration projects. And I know in the Tulalip situation, Allison, working with John Hall, a lot of the inventory and assessment work that he did, and Darla Boyer and you did before that, of your detailed monitoring assessment program has cultural considerations, and then you've identified which ones are priorities for restoration and protection. And I know that he had developed sort of a list of which ones would be potentially restored, as well as tools for local landowners. So those can be funded then through your 319 or your other funds if you want to add to that program. That often requires an internal negotiation with your other programs, in terms of using that money for that purpose. I hope that helps a little bit.
Definitely. Thank you, Linda. We appreciate that. Folks, if you have some other thoughts on this, because this is, kind of a big overarching question, I really recommend you reach out, over the week, as we have time to kind of think and digest about all the information we've heard today. I do want to make sure that we've got just a few minutes at the end to talk about our new Wetland Program Development Grant. So I think we're going to end the question and answer session here, but I want to say thank you again to Heather, Bridger, and Amanda for your wonderful presentations. They really sparked a lot of great conversation that I hope we can continue, beyond just this little 3-hour training here. So thank you so much. So we're gonna, I understand if you need to get going, because obviously we're running a little behind schedule today because we had so many good talks. But if you are able to stay to the end of the hour, I do want to give just a super quick overview of the new grant coming up and what to expect, and hopefully get a little bit of input on what it is that we want to see coming up for trainings and workshops. So if you have time to stay, please do. That would be great. But if you need to go, I release you. So at this point, we're going to stop the recording. And Linda, I think you're the only EPA folk that are